Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor William Leahy and Sir Mark Rylance.
So turn your phone off.
Well, thank you very much for that lovely welcome. I'm kind of used to it, but thanks anyway. So thanks ever so much for coming along this evening to this special event. It's obviously wonderful to have Mark back at Brunel. Now, you can see that he's dressed down for this evening because obviously, usually, this is how you will see him walking around. Now, as he was coming to Uxbridge, I did say to him, maybe leave the crown at home, because we have plenty of kings and queens in Uxbridge already. And thus he has come as he is. Now, before we start the session proper, let me just take you back to 2005, if I may. And the reason I want to take you back there is, at the time, I was the head of the English department here at Brunel. I'm a Shakespeare scholar, by the way. And at that time, the New Statesman magazine contacted me. The arts editor of the magazine was Rosie Millard. And she asked me if I would like to respond in print to something that had been said by someone. The thing that had been said publicly was that we need to rethink the traditional narrative of the authorship of Shakespeare's plays, and that we need to open our minds to the fact that maybe other authors were involved, for example, perhaps Francis Bacon. That statement was made by the then artistic director of the Globe Theatre in London, Mark Rylance, and obviously attracted lots of attention. So I took up the challenge, I responded, and I wrote an article for the New Statesman, which was really quite, how would you describe it, Mark?
Vicious.
Okay. I would say unkind, but thoughtful. And for me, that was the end of it. Now, a couple of months later, I was then approached by the Times Higher, which is a kind of academic magazine, to write something more about this issue. Now, as it so happened, there was a conference on at the Globe Theatre in London about this very issue and around collaboration in writing. And given that the audience that I was writing for this time was going to be an academic audience, I thought I'd better do some research. So as well as looking at a lot of Wikipedia articles and obviously reading some books, I went along to the conference. The conference was chaired by Mark, and it was extremely interesting. And I asked lots of questions there. And in fact, you remember me asking questions, I believe, which is very nice. And I have to quite honestly say I was very taken with what was being said by various people at that conference. Now, I won't say it changed my mind, but what it certainly did was open my mind to the fact that there is a difficulty with the traditional narrative of Shakespeare's life as they relate to Shakespeare's works. And I began to research more into this area and began to make a contact with Mark around that. First of all, I think I apologized by email for the article, which is always a good way back in. And then I wrote this article about collaboration, so on and so forth. And it really, I really got very interested in this whole area then. And at the time, Mark was the chairman of the Shakespearean Authorship Trust, which is an organisation which is interested in the authorship of the plays and likes to investigate it very openly. And he asked me to come and give a talk at the Globe about the latest things I was finding out, so on and so forth. As I say, Mark was a chairman of that trust. He asked me to become a trustee, which I did, and now I'm chairman, and he's a trustee. So, yeah, one for me there. Okay. The next thing that happened, I hope you don't mind me just giving a bit of background to this. Okay, he will be allowed to speak in a moment.
Should I go out and come back?
Yeah. So the next thing to say then, the next meeting with Mark, important one, Mark wrote a play called I Am Shakespeare, fantastically funny and interesting play about the authorship issue, which premiered at the Chichester Arts Festival in 2007. And at the end of that run, he invited me onto the stage, and we launched a petition called the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt about who wrote the plays of Shakespeare. So it's an online petition, anyone can go on and sign it. We launched it, and as it so happened, I was launching a master's program in Shakespeare authorship studies here at Brunel around about the same time. Now that story really took off. So the world's press got really interested. I can remember being, now this is big news for me, I know it's not for you, interviewed by the BBC, I was on telly, interviewed by Time magazine, and it really was global, interviewed in Germany, Colombia, Spain, all over the place, often in America. And as a proof of how global it went, it made front page news in the Himalayan Times. So, which surprised me. I didn't know they had a newspaper in the Himalayas. I didn't know any people were there, actually, in English, and that they were interested in the Shakespeare authorship question. But there you are. So I was very, very grateful to Mark for allowing me that sort of exposure, which allowed me to publicise the course. And we then, Mark came back to Brunel in 2009 and received an honorary doctorate. Okay, so that's us in 2009. I just noticed looking at that, I'm still wearing the same watch. I have taken it off in between, but even so. So there we are. We look eager little beavers there, or at least I do. And that was the last time Mark was here. It was a lovely occasion. And so it's absolutely fantastic that he's taken the trouble now to come back, revisit Brunel, and expose himself a bit more to a Brunel audience. So what we're going to do now, okay, so I'm going to speak to Mark about various things, okay? We are going to have a substantial Q&A session, okay, so you can save up your questions for the end, okay, and we'll have lots of opportunity for questions. And other things will happen. You'll see what I mean as they do, okay? So, Mark, as I sit down and now allow you to speak, the last time I saw you actually was on Saturday in Westminster Abbey. Now, I didn't get a chance to speak to you because you were actually performing, but it was a very unique kind of performance there in the Abbey. Could you just tell our audience what that performance was, what it was meant to be, why so many people found it so unique?
Well, 25 years ago, when Sam Wanamaker was still alive, he asked me to, and he asked a bunch of us who were supporters of his effort to rebuild Shakespeare's Globe. The Globe wasn't built at that time, so this is 92, to organize some different events that would be enjoyable for Shakespeare's birthday weekend. And I had gone on a walk with a friend from Poets' Corner, where the monument, you'll all recognize, that famous monument of Shakespeare. I think it's the right leg over the left. And he's leaning there, and he's pointing with his finger to a bit of text that's coming off a plinth here. And he's pointing with his finger to the word temples. And then if actually in the way the words are aligned, the line of his finger goes through temples and then through the word globe. So we had walked from Poets' Corner via the temple area, which is very resonant for Shakespeare lovers, to the globe. And I thought, well, what if we did this walk again, but what would be the aspect of Shakespeare that would be lovely to celebrate? And I thought the sonnets would be very lovely to hear, that you don't hear them very often. And so it was called Sweet Love Remembered. And every 15 minutes, a group of about 15 people were sent from Poets' Corner holding white and red roses along a path to the globe, about a 2-hour walk, hour-and-a-half walk. And at 12 different locations along the way, an actor would be hidden, disguised as a normal person in That's most of the budget went on those sessions, the costuming, the psychological work required. But they would be in a park or in a street. I remember in a street, Essex Street, where the Earl of Essex's house stood, a house James Burbage often visited. There was a young woman as a lawyer, and when the group approached, she came up and said, why have you been absent from me in the spring, to one of the members of the group. And just delivered the sonnet very directly and personably. And when the person on the walk had no answer or said, I don't really know why I was absent, she then just moved away. And so they were these little ambushes by real people with sonnets in the streets. And the actors knew who the people were because they were carrying roses. And the audience didn't know. Eventually, by the end of the walk, they were going up to the wrong people. A lot of actors chose to play bums and people, poor people in the, homeless people. And so a lot of homeless people were being approached by these audiences and being rudely telling them to clear off. Anyway, so we've done that for 25 years, and I was just going along a few months ago to ask permission to get into Poets' Corner again. And I thought, what if they would allow us to do a performance in the Abbey? And remarkably, they came back, the dean came back and said, yes, you're going to have Friday and Saturday night, which I realize are not great nights for Abbey audiences. That's not, the mornings are their time. So it's but it is the best time of the week for theatrical people. So miraculously, they gave us the whole of the Abbey on Friday and Saturday night last week, and we filled it with 25 actors, each who knew a sonnet and a speech and a scene. And I was one of those actors. So 350 people came into the Abbey. They could wander anywhere they wanted. And I was going on a loop. I was going from Richard II's tomb, where I spoke the speech he speaks in the Shakespeare play at the end of the play when he's in prison. And then I would have a sonnet that I would speak with different members of the audience who I met. And then I went and met Cleopatra in the North Transept and as the messenger and delivered the message that Antony had married Octavia. And then I ran from that scene because she gets very upset and pulls a knife out back to Richard II. And I went round that loop, but there were 25 of us doing that. And so what was very nice is it's a little bit inspired, or Ted Hughes rather has written it very well in his publication of collected works of Shakespeare. I don't know if you've come upon it, but there's a very nice collection of Shakespeare's writing that Ted Hughes has put together simply out of his taste as a poet for what's very beautiful. And you get these speeches removed from the context of the narrative or the pressures of being in a public performance, and you just get them very simply and purely. Something like tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace. By the time you get to that speech in Macbeth, you have a very complicated relationship with Macbeth, which colors the speech. But the speech stands in a fresh way, in a very beautiful way, outside of that context. Do you see what I mean? And it was very, very popular the last week, and I think it's partly some Shakespeare plays are a bit too long, and people enjoyed having just an hour and 15 minutes of random. Also, you're in a Shakespeare play, you're used to watching us Shakespeare actors going at it like this, rather than us coming up intimately to you and saying, shall I compare thee to a summer's day?
Mark, I'm a teacher, and I always find the best way to communicate that kind of message is to perhaps enact it. So, let's pretend, okay?
Yeah, I'm laughing because, Bill, we've set this up before, and yet he's acting it very well.
Oh, come on.
We've just come
up with it. No. So, right, you didn't hear that. Here we are in Westminster Abbey. Now, I need a partner. Would you mind? Okay. Here we are. Okay, so I'm here with my mistress. I'm here with my wife. Okay, my wife is there. Okay.
Watch out, my mum's there.
All right, okay. All right, Mum. Yeah, okay. So we're in Westminster Abbey, okay, and we're wandering around, okay, and hey, honey, this is acting, by the way, okay. Hey, honey, look at those stained glass windows. They're awesome.
Right. So I would see that they, and I've said to you, and I would have brought them into one of the many tombs, beautiful tombs. There are over 3,000 people buried there. So there was a lot of choice. And do you mind me using you? It's nothing personal, but this would be there would be a sarcophagus here and a body, and maybe the stone face of the body is worn away a bit, but the body is dressed in stone, a version of well, not that picture anymore, but of very expensive, elaborate clothes. Yes, you know the type of. Might have been I actually said it sometimes. It might be Elizabeth I, the Queen. So I'd bring you to them out. When I have seen, by time's fell hand defaced, the rich, proud cost of outworn, buried age, when sometime lofty towers I see down raised, and brass, eternal slave to mortal rage, when I have seen the hungry ocean gain advantage on the kingdom of the shore, and the firm soil win of the watery main, increasing store with loss, and loss with store. When I have seen such interchange of state, or state itself confounded to decay, ruin hath taught me thus to ruminate. That time will come and take my love away. This thought is as a death which cannot choose, but weep to have that which it fears to lose. And as Bill, and your I don't know your name, what's your name? Catherine. Oh, thanks. So,
Thank you.
What was nice was when I had a couple like this, because that's the resonance of the poem, is that when you love someone very much, it gets frightening. The longer you're together, it gets more frightening that one of you is going to go first. Who's it going to be? I dread the loss of my wife, but I would prefer to suffer it myself than to leave her on her own. But it's something I think about. That time will come and take my love away. And to say that intimately to a couple who are not expecting you to say that, and look in their eyes and give them time to think about it, was very, very, very remarkable and satisfying for me as a channeling Shakespeare. It's very direct. It would leave them though a little depressed.
Yeah. Sorry.
So I then would say, oh, be not afeard. The isle's full of noises, sounds and sweet airs that give delight. And it was full of noises, the Abbey. In fact, this aisle of the Abbey was also full of noises, but that's another matter. It was full of noises, sounds and sweet airs that give delight and hurt not. Sometimes 1,000 jangling instruments will hum about mine ears. And sometimes voices that if I then had woke after a long sleep, would make me sleep again. And then in dreaming, methought the clouds did open and show riches. And sometimes there would be a beautiful painted ceiling above me in the Abbey, and I'd say, look, riches, ready to drop upon me. That when I woke, I cried to sleep again. And then I might walk away, or I might even, if they were still attentive as you all are, I'd say, life's but a walking shadow. a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then he is heard no more. And I'd leave on that. So it was like a melody of little things. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. But I think it's much nicer than sit. I mean, I like to sit and watch and listen to Shakespeare play, but there's something magical about getting it direct, isn't there? And intimate. Unfortunately, it's difficult for me to do it so intimately because large groups of people would gather around me because I'm notorious now. Whereas some of the other actors who were, you know, as anonymous as each of you may be to each other, they were able to have a lot of intimate Shakespearean experiences with people. And then you get a real feel of the author's character, I think, particularly in the sonnets. You get a very, very strong feeling of the character. I despair the teaching that says the sonnets are a technical exercise. But that, unfortunately, is one of the twisted positions that Stratfordian scholars have to get into to explain away the difficulties in the sonnets with their candidate for the authorship.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Mark. that was supposed to take 5 minutes, but never mind. I have to say, I find acting really easy, actually. Well, we'll move on. Now, let's start. Okay. Now, a lot of people would be surprised to hear that you were actually brought up in America.
Yeah.
Is that right? Now,
Yeah.
what were you doing there?
My parents emigrated there in 1962, and we lived on the campus of a A-level school, a high school called Choate School. My father was an English teacher, and then in '69 we moved further away from England, much to my mother's despair, to the Midwest, to a city called Milwaukee, where my father became the head of an English department, and we lived in the suburbs of that town. And my mother then eventually became an English teacher as well, and then eventually a therapist. But we lived there until I lived there until 1978, when I came back to go to RADA at London.
Right, so you came back to go to RADA, so the acting thing had already started there in America.
Yeah.
And how did you what was it that got you into acting?
I acted before. I was taken to the theatre a lot by my parents, but I acted with my friends for our own enjoyment, really, not with an audience. And there is a certain part of me that still feels betrayed by the fact that I act for people and in front of people now. There's a certain childish part of me that doesn't understand that. We acted we had this huge campus of this school, so there were many forests and fields and different things on this campus, and also there was the basement. And we would take a bit like a commedia troupe of actors. We would take the stock characters from a show like Star Trek, Spock, Kirk, the Scotsman in the engine room, Lieutenant Uhura, and we would improvise for hours and hours and hours different dramas and events inspired by these different TV shows of that era: Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Land of the Giants, Lost in Space, Wild Wild West. So I was acting long before I knew there was there was a profession for acting.
Right, okay.
And then in school, I got involved in a very, very active drama department, very, very active, from the age of about 12. We building sets, doing lighting, playing many classical parts, singing Don Quixote in Man of La Mancha, Pseudolus in Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. In America, it's part of the tradition that you do musicals every year in high school, and so I used to do a lot of singing and dancing as well as playing Hamlet at 16.
You have the floor.
And Romeo at 17. So I was exposed to a lot of varied drama, including new plays as well, in between the age of 12 to 18. And much to my surprise, arrived at RADA thinking that I would be well out of my league, coming from the Midwest of America. But I actually had more experience than most of the English kids.
Oh, really?
At the school, yeah.
So you felt very comfortable at RADA?
No,
And why not?
Even in the Midwest, I have a friend in the state next to Wisconsin called Minnesota, a friend called Robert Bly, a wonderful poet. And Robert was asked once, what's the difference between someone from Wisconsin and someone from Minnesota? And he said, if a man from Wisconsin tells you a joke, you don't laugh until a week later. The sense of humor is very dry, and due to long winters in that part of you have a week to think about a joke. You need a week, really. You need to last that long. So I had
brought that to RADA.
Well, I had
skill.
I had no. I just had no connection. I didn't really know pub culture. I didn't know what a Lancashire accent was, or a Yorkshire accent, or. I'd spent quite a few summers in England at my grandparents' house in the 60s and early 70s, so I had a little bit of an inkling of things, but I was just quite shy too, and it was a very foreign culture for me.
Okay, so after RADA, I mean, what's the next step? Where did you go? Because it seems quite quickly you became, quite an important Shakespearean actor.
It didn't feel that way to me, but I suppose I was given my first job at the Citizens Theatre in Glasgow, which was a wonderful theatre, and I had it was a 60-week repertory contract, and we did a number of plays and went to the Venice Biennale Festival, which at 1920 was a pretty wonderful aspect of being an actor. And then shortly after that, I got a job at the RSC in '82 and did 2.5 years with them, playing Ariel to Derek Jacobi's Prospero, and playing with a number of wonderful actors, Bob Peck and Alan Armstrong, Helen Mirren, Sinead Cusack, Michael Gambon, David Bradley. The company was chock-a-block full of wonderful actors, so I learnt a lot from them.
And what was the RSC like at that time?
It was a mafia it was the kindergarten run by the mafia.
Oh, really?
Okay. Was what we actors felt about it. It was very director-led. There wasn't much. We'd go to the pub afterwards, and these actors would be singing and telling stories and playing games and they were wild, wonderful characters. Pete Postlethwaite was in the company. You might want to slip away before things got too drunken, as it could sometimes turn nasty. But they were really rich, fantastic people. But in the rehearsal room, it was so, no offense intended, Bill, but it was so literary and university-led and planned out by the directors and staged and blocked that all the actors sat around almost half asleep, reading their newspapers. And I, as a young actor, felt I'd always grown up in school having a lot of input into the story and being very involved, and I just felt none of our natural energy was being involved. We were all just being controlled and moved around. And once the opening night passed, the directors never came back. They were only interested in the reviews. One very famous director at that time, really successful director, I couldn't believe came out to dinner and opened a briefcase full of reviews and shared his reviews around like they were reports from a school. And I thought, you don't need these people to approve what you're doing. You're a genius with Shakespeare. But there was something about getting good marks for doing it. So it wasn't very theatrical, I found, and it led me to leave the RSC and form a cooperative theatre company and try and work without directors.
All right. Now that point you're making there about the reviews, you don't read your reviews, do you?
I don't anymore, no.
Since when?
Since about mid-'80s, late 80s. I'll occasionally stumble upon one by accident, but I'll tend to just look away. I'm not. My wife reads them and enjoys them, and she tells me whether they're bad or good or medium. That kind of general kind of description. But I don't. I don't find them helpful to me. But I don't mind people writing reviews and people enjoying reviews. It's just a different profession. It's a different activity than the one I'm doing.
Okay. And at the RSC at that time, you're a young actor. You are, I suppose, what one would say, developing your craft.
Yeah.
What were you developing? How were you developing your craft? How was your development or your approach different to, let's say, any of those famous actors that you've just told us about?
Well, I've always been an actor who, it took me a while to understand why I was an actor. Not till my 30s did I realize that the most important things for me in acting were the community, was having a community where we were making something together. That I find a party, I'm a little bit shy when there isn't anything we're doing other than talking directly with other people. That's a bit straight on for me. I prefer to be making something together with a group of people or playing a game, or that there's something we're focusing on together rather than just looking straight at each other. And so the community was very important to me, but also in terms of acting, I like to play. I don't like to present demonstrations of what's happening. I like to actually play it and pretend I'm really there. I have a very childish enjoyment of that from a very early age. Something was in my DNA, or maybe because I had difficulty speaking when I was very young, and it was liberating to pretend to be someone else. I was sitting, funnily enough, I was sitting on the Sonnet Walk on Sunday. I had to sit in the Middle Temple Hall and pretend to be a barrister with a mask on, a commedia mask. And I would say that sonnet I did for you in a very grand voice. When I have seen by time's fell hand defaced. Slightly better than that, but I really got into this thing. I sat there for a few hours believing I was a barrister. And I thought, well, I'll do something I need to do while I'm waiting for the people to come, because it's 20 minutes or so. So I thought, well, I'll write a letter of thank you to the Queen for giving me a knighthood. And I read this letter back yesterday, at the end of the day, and it's so grand and pompous and kind of barrister-like, you know. Your Majesty, how much I admired, you know. And I thought, I was really in character. I wrote the letter in character without even being aware. That's partly the mask. The Italian masks are very powerful. But it was funny to how much we take on a character to meet a bank manager, or to meet our line manager, or to talk with our children, or to talk with our dog, or to get a ticket at the Uxbridge train station. We're taking on characters all the time, and I'm just very practiced or fluid at that. I don't know why I got into this. What did I learn? What did you ask me? I forgot your question.
I asked you...
what did I learn? It took me a while to realize that that's what I enjoyed.
I'm glad you remember, because I forgot, actually.
And then that's what I enjoyed, and it's why I wasn't particularly keen on film work. Because unless you do what Dan Day-Lewis does and becomes President Lincoln for the whole of the shoot. So from about a month before they filmed Lincoln, Steven Spielberg was saying to me, when he would call Dan Day-Lewis, President Lincoln would answer. And then throughout the shoot, he would go and visit President Lincoln in the caravan and would speak with President Lincoln. Dan doesn't come out of character. And goes and lives, and I think Rebecca Miller, his wife, stays away, and he lives alone in a hotel room. So he immerses himself and is President Lincoln for all the time. So when the shoot ended, Stephen went to the caravan and there was Dan Day-Lewis, the English actor again, and Stephen had to step out of the caravan and wept because he realized he would never meet his friend President Lincoln again. Amazing, isn't it? So, but unless you do something like that on film, it's all stop and start, and you can't really make the kind of headway that you can if you play Hamlet 400 times, 8 times a week, including places like the Palace Theatre, Manchester, and Broadmoor Special Hospital, to a small group of patients and doctors.
Why do you link the Palace Theatre in Manchester and Broadmoor? Are they similar
Am I picking up
types of audience?
No, they're very different audiences, very different.
Okay, so you developed your craft there, you move on from the RSC. Can I just ask you...
So coming back to your question, sorry. So one of the things is, sorry, I've remembered your question now. So one of the things was, I'm in a preview of Arden of Faversham. Do you know the play Arden of Faversham? It's a very wonderful play, the first middle-class domestic murder tragedy, where Alice Arden tries to murder her husband. Anyway, I was playing young Michael, who had been left to guard the house on an evening, and it's dark, and in rehearsals I had been lying down like this, and then this man comes in, and I think it's a ghost, and I'd just been going from here, who are you, or whatever the line was, who are you, or maybe I went like, who are you, and when the man came in on this preview, all I did different was I got up and said, who are you? I really don't feel I did anything much different than that. But I didn't stay lying down, I stood up. This was the old other place at the RSC, and the actor who was playing this part, who was about that tall and this big, and I had to walk down these alleyways, and at one moment we passed by some lockers, and he got me, he turned, got me by the coat, and pushed me against the lobby, the lockers, bang, and said, "We're not all fucking improvisers!" and then we walked on, and stood waiting to go on for another scene, and so
yeah,
one of the
I'm sorry about that, Mark. I didn't, you know.
One of the main things you have to learn as a young actor is how to deal with older actors.
Right, okay.
Yeah, because there's always a new energy coming in, isn't there? Breaking things up in any profession.
Yeah.
And it's frightening and upsetting for the older actors, very.
Yeah.
You don't even realize that you are frightening and challenging them just by being who you are.
Okay, so can I just ask before we move on, because I want to deal with this in a bit more detail later, but at the RSC, there you are with all the Shakespearean actors, you know, in one of the centres of Shakespearean culture in the whole world. Were you already having doubts about the authorship of the plays?
No, none at all.
No? Okay.
No, none at all. I would have many a romantic evening wandering around Stratford-upon-Avon, imagining the author there, and that these were fields that he walked in, and this was where his house was, and no, I was thrilled. I've been taken there very often during the 70s by my family, and it had always been a kind of mecca for my mother particularly, and my father, but my mother particularly. And so I was thrilled to be there. I hadn't connected with it at all.
Okay, so then you left the RSC, you set up your own company, and then I guess a fairly momentous thing happened whereby you were asked to become artistic director of the Globe Theatre in 1995. Now, I know this picture that I've got up, this play, your play, is much, much later than that, but yeah. I'll come back to that. There's a reason why I've juxtaposed the two. Oh. Can you tell us a bit about 1995, you are asked to be artistic director of the Globe, the first artistic director, and it's just opening. It sounds would sound to us like a dream job, so of course you would take it, but were you worried? Did you jump at it? Did you think, oh my God, why me?
No, I actually, honestly, I turned it down at first. It's funny, I don't know if you realize it like this too, but there's such a synchronicity in my life at certain moments, and it feels like I pass by certain major things that are going to happen before they happen. I get an image of them, and when I formed this cooperative theatre company in 1985, we couldn't find anywhere cheap enough to play in London until we found the Bear Gardens Museum, which was where Sam Wanamaker was ensconced, and we could rent that very cheaply, and so I played there in 1985. But then I didn't really get involved with the project until 1991, when my wife and I were doing a production of, we'd formed a company called Phoebus Cart, and we were doing a production of The Tempest at the Rollright Stone Circle to explore what would happen in those ancient stone circles if you did a kind of, a healthy, good ritual and drew 600 or 700 people to it. And we discovered at that time that the stone circles, like the Royal White Stones and the Stonehenge, have the same diameter as the globe, this 100-foot diameter. So we approached Sam, or my wife said, why don't we approach Sam? And when I bumped into him at a conference with Mel Gibson about Hamlet in Berkeley, California, of all places, I had driven across Blackfriars Bridge in a taxi and looked over and thought I'd seen the globe. So I said to Sam, oh, it's coming on really well. I saw it the other day from the bridge. And he looked at me so strangely and said, no, it's just a hole in the ground. The economic downturn had really killed it in the late 80s, and they were begging cement trucks who were coming from other building sites and still had a little bit of cement in their truck to swing by and drop the remaining bits of cement into those big pillars that hold up the piazza. They had a small crew of about 5 men building it very, very slowly. So we went and saw Sam, and he allowed us to do our tempest there in the concrete substructure of what would eventually become the Globe site. And at that time, I got invited to be part of a group called the Artistic Directorate, artists that Sam had gathered around him. And when Sam died in '93, those elderly actors, much to my surprise, I was the youngest person in the group, said, we need an actor again running this place, and he's the one who should do it, pointing at me. And I knew I was much too improvisational again, that I was going to get thrown up against some lockers if I did that job. And I said, no, I really think you need a very much more steady hand to bring this big boat, so to speak, up the Thames, so to speak, and plant it here with royal openings and all these different people who'd given money needing to be satisfied. And Sam Wanamaker, a bit like Max Bialystock in The Producers, had promised 100% to everyone. You know what I mean? The academics, the Americans, all the different groups that were interested in it, all wanted their pound of flesh. And so I said no at first, and then I thought about it, and I thought, well, I really loved Sam, and if this group of people feel that I am the one who would be best to do it, then maybe that's my service to Sam. I did think like that at the time, and so I went back into the process, and Peter Hall and Burkhoff were the other two candidates with me, and I got unanimously elected to do it. But it was a very, very difficult job.
Yeah. Well, I mean, were you aware, I can remember at the time, so I was just about to start my PhD, I think. At the time, there was this kind of fear that this new globe would become a kind of Shakespeare Disneyland, almost like a theme park, just to attract American tourists and so on and so forth. I mean, were you aware of that kind of fear, and did you actively work against the possibility of that ever happening?
Yeah, I personally don't. I found it a little bit odd, the fears about tourists coming to Shakespeare. What's wrong with that? Who are all those people up in Stratford-upon-Avon? Are they all local people? I was a little bit suspicious of that, and I thought how wonderful that people want to visit our country with all the stuff that goes on here. I mean, how wonderful, and that they want to come, when they come here, and hear a Shakespeare play. Certainly, I don't know about you, but for me, when I'm on holiday, a certain window opens in my soul. I'm a little bit more open. I'm not so focused on jobs and fixing the windows or all those different things that you have to do in your mundane life. So I think someone on holiday coming to a play is a great opportunity to affect them and to give them a different perspective. So I had no problem with that. The project had been haunted by that accusation, partly because Sam was American. And Sam, in his excitement in the early days, had plans for the whole of the South Bank. He had whole models for the whole of the South Bank. A lot of what he saw, you will now see on the South Bank. He was right. It was ripe for development into a great cultural center of one of the cultural centers of London. But at that time, they thought he was just in it to make money, and he was to Disneyfy it and cheapen it. And so those fears and criticisms, they just sharpened my intent that as they had sharpened Sam's intent, that the project had to have enormous academic rigor, research and scholarship, that we would build the globe with authentic materials, green oak, thatch, which was an incredible fight to get the first thatched building allowed again in England. All the materials and all this craft that Theo Crosby, the great architect, that we would not do things with power tools. We would really investigate it very, very rigorously because of that criticism that we were Disneyfying it, so in approaching it in a cartoon or facile way, I think is what they meant by that criticism. So it was very, it meant that one had to be very rigorous.
Well, and in fact, I mean, you were very successful in that. It actually became recognized for precisely being that kind of a very rigorous environment for Shakespeare.
I hope so. Sometimes we were. We weren't always.
Right,
sometimes.
okay. But I guess, so you were there for 10 years. Now, this is the time. Now, one mark of the success of the Globe is it has actually really become the centre of global Shakespeare knowledge, if you like, some kind of focus for it.
Academia has become much more interested in how the plays were played.
Exactly.
And performance history, hasn't it?
Exactly. Now, but at that time, during those 10 years, there you are in this environment, and you are now publicly questioning the authorship of the plays. Now, what sort of issues did that give rise to? Now, this is why I've put this this picture of your play up, because the play is very much about.
Well, I knew my job was not. My job as artistic director was not to forward any particular candidate's case or even forward the authorship question. On the other hand, my job, I felt, was to welcome any lover of Shakespeare to the Globe. And every person I've ever met who's interested in the authorship question has been a devout lover of Shakespeare. So I felt I really wanted the groups to get the different people who had different. I felt we all have a different image of who the author is, and it's probably someone like us. So I am Shakespeare. We all, and I wanted the different people, rather than fighting about your image is better than, is not as good as my image, to accept that and talk with each other. So I wanted more openness, but I was told in no uncertain terms very early on not to mention it by the chief executive, and they were worried about it. And I think I was pretty attacked behind the scenes by Stanley Wells and by other people who were concerned about my views. I think Bernard Levin wrote, when I was announced, one of the articles was a heretic at the Globe. And it is almost a religious question for some people. It has that emotional connection. So the word heretic is used aptly. Yeah, so I had to be a little bit careful. Yeah. But I would get into conflict in the shop, for example, because there would be, I would say, could we have, there's a wonderful book by John Michel.
Who wrote Shakespeare?
Who wrote Shakespeare? It's just an overview of the authorship question. It's not like fighting for one candidate or another. It just introduces you to. Could we have that in the bookshop? No. Why not? Well, we're about Shakespeare's workplace, not his birthplace. We're not about the authorship question at the Globe. We're about the playing of Shakespeare's plays. And I think, yeah, that's right, we are. And then I'd go in the bookshop and I'd find 12 books on the man from Stratford, 4 or 5 of them aimed at children, 2 or 3 biographical films, picture books, cut-out books. There'd be about 15 or 18 items in there that were all about the Stratford man. And aimed at young people. God forbid I had brought an authorship book aimed at young people in. So I'd go back and say, you say we're not about biography, but there's all these books in there about the Stratford man. Could we not just have 1 or 2 books that are about another view? These people love Shakespeare too. Oh, well, it's a bit like the Green Party and the Labour and Conservative parties. It's proportionality, you see. Most people believe the man from Stratford wrote the plays, so that's why there should be 18 or 20 books, and maybe you can have 1. But we all need, the literary committee was formed, we're all going to need to read that one and comment on it. Well, I said, are we going to do that with all the other biography books? No, they're all right. They Cambridge Press and people who publish them, you know, they're all fine. But we're all going to read this one. And so I had to be very patient and sit through what I felt was a very, very unfair, this fearfulness of the orthodoxy about what might happen if unorthodox views came in. But I would never, I hasten to add, though I feel the authorship question has helped me in my own acting and enjoyment of Shakespeare, I would never do a Shakespeare play to forward the case for Francis Bacon. I mean, that's not, I don't feel the author wrote the plays to forward their own biography. So that would never come into my mind. But
yeah. Okay, but I mean, I guess it's understandable. There you are, you're a very public figure talking about these things. And now it's around the end of that period that I got to know you. And I started then talking publicly about the authorship question. And as maybe the first academic doing so, received quite a lot of adverse publicity, quite a lot of hate mail. And I've got a few quotes that I've taken. Now, I just want to show you a few of the sort of emails that I've received over the years, because I'm sure you've received a lot more and a lot worse than this. Now, these are just the emails, usually in response to something that I've written in The Guardian or whatever. So these are not the comments that come after those online articles, which really, really are super toxic, okay? But it's this sort of thing that I would receive. So I thought it'd be helpful to illustrate again what a useless dipshit you are. See below, so I look below. You are an imbecile. Another one. William Leahy, I must remember your name just so I don't waste any more time reading your stupid theories. You clearly are ignorant and deranged. Stop spouting utter bollocks about the greatest writer that the English language has ever known. And here's one that's very relevant to where we are now. I could understand it if Leahy was from a proper university. But Brunel, do me a favour. Do me a favour. Now, I assume that you've received, also various stuff like that, sometimes publicly. And I believe even Stanley Wells, didn't he pull your beard or something at one
I did. I had a beard at some point. I was playing something at the Globe, and we met at the Rose Theatre. Stanley was a board member, a trustee member of the Globe Theatre, and at the RSC when I worked at the RSC. And we met it was a kind of one of those wine receptions at the site of the Rose Theatre. And yes, he kind of went red when he saw me and came over and pulled my beard. Oh, like that. Naughty Mark, he said, which is what he generally calls me, Naughty Mark. Yeah, dear Stanley,
So it is, when you put it in this kind of context, it's pretty funny, okay, this sort of criticism. However, there is quite a serious side to the criticism, and I've got one here. This is a letter to the New York Times. So the demand that Shakespeare did not write the plays attributed to him seems harmless enough until one reflects on its implications. Should claims that the Holocaust did not occur also be made part of the standard curriculum? So you can see that's from Stephen Greenblatt, who's probably the world's most famous Shakespearean scholar at Harvard.
And who's a friend of mine now, by the way. Because we corresponded about this, and I said that it was particularly insulting to people like me. I felt it was also insulting to those who had suffered the Holocaust to even to compare that event to this much less important matter. He says he was misunderstood and he didn't mean it that way. And it is an interesting question whether, when you're teaching a subject, you do need to channel the thinking within a certain area and not, if you allow. I mean, you're channeling this conversation now through your questions before opening up to anyone's questions. And do you need to do that with a subject matter? And where, if you draw a line like that, does that enhance the teaching or not enhance the teaching? It's an interesting question. I just think the comparison is a little bit tactless and insensitive.
Okay.
Have you seen the film The Son of Saul, by the way?
Yes.
Have you seen that? Gosh, if you haven't seen Son of Saul, it's the most amazing film. Sorry, just a side little tip there.
No. So 2005 then, you leave the Globe. Now, I assume this was a momentous kind of step because, as far as I know, you're leaving something, a job that seems made for you in many ways, into nothing else.
Yeah.
There was no kind of structure after that, just 2005, you're out, and what was going through your mind there? That was a risk.
I got very tired and I got very depressed and dispirited about everything and resigned, as I felt I couldn't really cope anymore with the pressures of the job, and I really had stopped working elsewhere, and so I didn't really know what I was going to do, and I decided to take 3 months to archive all my papers and my work of the 10 years, which is now really great. Now I can go back and find things, and other people who want to find out things, it's good to do an archive. But it was bloody painful, because I was put in Sam's old office in the Bear Gardens, and I thought Dominic, who's a great friend of mine, I thought people were going to come over regularly and ask me, how did you do this? How do you play the stage? What do you think about this, or why was this done? No one came. Not just really no one. I looked out the window and saw the actors going to rehearse for the first plays of that season. Now Dominic took the rational decision. It's not a bad decision that he couldn't connect. I was too powerful a shadow or a resonance, and he needed to just make it his own and stop.
So this is Dominic Dromgoole, the following artistic director.
Sorry.
Yeah.
But only my daughter Juliet came and helped me archive. So it was a very strange 3 months after. It was a very strange experience. As any of you who've changed jobs or gone from a leadership role to not being a leader, it's very strange not to be needed. And I think I should have taken the archives far away and not done them nearby. It was a little bit strange to be around and see things. Right, yeah. But now I'm still very so yeah, I went out and nothing happened for a while.
But then you seemed to fall on your feet when the portrayal of Dr. David Kelly in the program that was called
The Government Inspector.
The Government Inspector. So that was very, very well received, and indeed I think won a BAFTA, am I right?
Yeah.
Now that's playing on television, so
yeah.
Was that your first major television role, and how did you adapt to that different sort of environment?
Well, that was with the marvelous director Peter Kosminski, who subsequently directed Wolf Hall, and has directed. He writes his own things. I think he wrote that. He's about to come out with a film about young people leaving England to go and join ISIS. So you can imagine the dangerous process of research for such a film like that. He's the most radical and fantastic film director, so it was very exciting to work with him. That was the first time we worked together. I think I made that before I left the Globe, and then it came out after the Globe.
Really? All right, I see.
But it was we filmed that. There was a famous meeting between a journalist called Gilligan and David Kelly at the Charing Cross Hotel in the bar when Kelly shares some of the stuff the government had wished he hadn't shared about sexy up dossiers. Sorry, I'm not using the right words. And when we filmed it, we were sitting at a table in that Charing Cross bar, and I went over to get a glass of water from him, and the bartender was there at the bar, and I was getting a glass of water from him, and he said, it all looks, they didn't sit there, he said, they sat over there. I said, what do you mean? Kelly and Gilligan, they sat at that table over there. I understand why you're here, the light's better, but they sat over there. And it was only a year later that we were in the same places filming. So it was a very resonant job, that job. But I don't remember it raising my profile much or anything. And, I mean, if that's what you're meaning, did I feel suddenly I was more famous?
No, just a different style of acting.
Yeah, a different style of acting, yeah.
Yeah, and
well, because there's a lot of footage of Kelly and a lot of vocal. I listened to his voice a lot. And I mean even that gesture there, I couldn't really get. I couldn't. His hair was whiter, and he was more academic than I can portray really.
okay.
But some of that is him. He was very, very careful and an intelligent man, Dr. David Kelly.
So then, I mean, having left the Globe, then you start, I suppose, a kind of, does one call it a portfolio career now, where you're working in television, you're on stage, you're in film, and you have a number of successes on the stage. So starting the big one with Boeing.
After I left the Globe, I set off. I wanted to write this play, I Am Shakespeare. I wanted to go back. I felt like I'd been the front man, not only the lead actor, which is really the front man, the waiter, if theatre's like a restaurant, but I was also the host, the artistic director, and I was doing press conferences, and I was really just always in a suit up at the front of the restaurant. And I thought, I'd really like to get back and chop vegetables and be in the kitchen, so to speak. So I being a great admirer of a theatre company called Complicité and artists like Robert Lepage, and actually right back to the early 80s, that's what I wanted to do, was make original works. And I happened by accident to be good at Shakespeare, or what I did with Shakespeare was popular. So it was kind of by accident that my whole career had been about Shakespeare, not about making new things. So I've kind of decided in 2005, I'm only going to do Shakespeare every 5 years or so. And I want to write a play. What do I know about? I know about Shakespeare, so I better write a play about. So that's how I Am Shakespeare came up. And then I was trying to get Matthew Warchers, the director of the Old Vic now, to direct it. And he said, well, I'll do that if you'll come and do Boeing, Boeing, which is this French farce. We're just going to fit it in. We'll just do it for a little while. For both of us, it was just a chance to enjoy working together. And then that really took off. And I met Sonia Friedman, the incredible producer, the most powerful producer in the world now, with the largest production company, primarily run by women and led by her. Fantastic example of what an organization run by women can do, Sonia Friedman Productions. Anyway, she took me to New York. She argued when the play transferred to New York that I should go, which was quite a fight she had to have. And then that was very popular in New York, and I developed this relationship, this Broadway career.
Yeah, so you for that performance you received a Tony, and then Jerusalem was on in the West End.
Well, then I came back from Broadway, having played a year on Broadway, and said I was going to do this play at the Royal Court. And at that time, Rooster Byron was in a wheelchair.
This is the character, Rooster Byron.
Rooster Byron. And Sonia and my wife, they all thought I was nuts to be going back to the Royal Court to do an unknown play. But I'd seen all Jez Butterworth's plays from Mojo on, and I thought they were just fantastic. So I didn't care whether this one was going to work or not. I just wanted to work with him.
Did many people in the audience see Jerusalem? Yeah, it was quite extraordinary. And the question that I wanted to ask you actually was, when you saw this play, when you had this play in front of you, I mean, it's now regarded as perhaps the most important British English play of the last 30 years or so. Were you aware of how important this play was?
No, it came to me many years before, and it was called St. George's Day, and it was very raw and rough. Jez is a very raw, rough writer, and I just liked it because I was very interested in St. George's Day, going back to the connection to Shakespeare and this deep myth of our culture of St. George, the dragon, and the maiden. And there are lovely different versions of that. So I was interested in that aspect of it, and I thought, well, this is a subject matter that's curious to me. But the play itself wasn't. The play was just raw and wild. And then it came up again in 2000. 5 years later, they came back to me. I think they'd tried it with other people for a while, and then they came back to me. And it had changed, and Rooster he'd had a motorcycle accident. He jumped and had a motorcycle accident. That was still in the play when we did it, but he was in a wheelchair, and so the set was all ramps, and then that got changed just before we went into rehearsal. But I've never been in a play that changed so much in the rehearsals.
All right, okay.
They discovered after a week or two we needed 2 more characters. The Royal Court said okay. One day he arrived with all those speeches, 6 or 7 set speeches, the speech about the giant, the speech about the wood at the end, all the tall tales that Rooster told. He would just arrive with this material, and I liked it. I liked it, but it was unusual. And the whole thing got shaped, and then we cut about 45 minutes of it too, before we eventually opened.
So it was if you ever get it, if it's ever put back on, I mean, I really recommend it. And then, of course, it went to Broadway as well. You received another Tony for that.
Yeah.
Then while you were doing other things, you also then came back to the Globe and did Richard III and Twelfth Night, which then went to Broadway, and you received another Tony. So you're doing quite well on stage. So the move from the Globe, it kind of turned out okay in the end, I guess. Yeah. And at the same
time... About that time, I got rid of all my agents, too. About that
really?
time, I decided I really didn't... All my career as an actor, I don't know if any of you are actors here, but all your career as an actor, you're told by agents, you must have... get equal power in all the different mediums. It's no good to just be successful in the theatre. You must break into television and film, and you must have a career in all these mediums. Agents make a lot more money from films and television than theatre, so they have a motivation to do that. But it's convincing to you as a young actor. And I was seeing all my fellow actors, Dan Day-Lewis and Gary Oldman and Ken Branagh, and all of them were doing wonderfully in film, and I was never able to really break into film. I made good films for television, like The Grass Arena early on, but somehow it never happened for me. So I always felt a little inadequate. And then I thought, well, this is ridiculous. Here I am really successful and having a lovely time, and I'm feeling inadequate. It's stupid. The kabuki actors don't worry about being film actors or TV actors. They're just great kabuki actors, or the Kathakali actors, all these wonderful international actors I'd seen at the Globe who were so marvelous. And I thought, I've had enough. I'm going to be a theatre actor, and I don't want an agent, and I don't want to do television or film anymore. If something comes, I might do it, but this is what I like to do, and this is what I'm trained to do. And then, of course, as soon as I said that, then nature abhors a vacuum. It's a bold thing to do, to actually really say you don't want the thing you really want. But you have to really say it for the vacuum to be formed. But it does feel like that's the womb-like way, isn't it? That's the Mary Magdalene feminine way of moving towards your fate, to what you want, is to draw in a womb-like fashion the thing towards you, rather than go out and try and hunt it or penetrate it or capture it, which is the more masculine way.
Okay,
that's
so
interesting.
I'll move fairly quickly in these last few questions so that we can get questions from the audience. So Wolf Hall, what do we need to say? Enormously successful, quite rightly. And then, of course, you're over in Hollywood, Bridge of Spies, for which you get an Oscar.
Yeah.
Come on, haven't you had enough?
I know.
Really?
I know.
And which is a very interesting film, quite a serious film in many ways. So, but that's the start of your development of the relationship with Steven Spielberg. So this, you can see behind you, it says BFG. Yeah. That's because I think we weren't allowed to use a photo from the film, the BFG.
Really?
Yeah, because this is not teaching. This is whatever it is. So you've developed this relationship with Spielberg. Now, one thinks of the great sort of relationships between directors and actors. Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro, for example. I believe you're making another film with him now. Is that right? Or in the future, or soon?
Yeah, we were going to be making a film right now about a young boy called Edgardo Mortara, who was a Jewish boy in the 1840s, 1860s in Italy, whose Christian maid in this Jewish family got very concerned when he was a baby and he was dying, and she blessed him privately in the bedroom without telling the family. She christened him, so to speak, because she was frightened he'd go to hell. And he survives. And about 6 years later, she confesses this to her Catholic priest. And at that time, if once the Catholics knew a child had been baptized, so to speak, they would then go in and take the child from the Jewish family and raise it as a Catholic child. And so I would play the Pope Pius VI, who oversees this kidnapping of Edgardo Mortara. So it's a very interesting film that Tony Kushner has written.
Right, and you've just got this connection with...
Yeah, and
with
I've got it, but
It's as simple
Stephen
as that.
couldn't find the little boy, so the film's been put off.
All right,
But
okay.
yes, I've made 3 films with Stephen, and we enjoy working together very much, so
And again,
it looks
it's
like
been
I'll be making more.
quite successful. So there you are.
Yeah.
So this is another picture of you and me.
Yeah.
I had to squeeze into that dress. Actually, I don't know who the 2 women act. I know I should, but who are the 2 women actors?
Well, I've forgotten their names too now.
Right.
She was in that amazing film, the one who won the Best Actress. Yeah, I just saw the film recently about the woman whose kid Room. Yeah.
Oh, right.
Incredible
Okay.
film.
Okay,
Huh?
that one. Yeah. Okay.
Incredible story.
So can I just ask you a final question? Okay, before we open the floor.
Hollywood, 2
Yes,
exclamations.
Hollywood. What I mean by that is, how do you even have a normal conversation in Hollywood? What can you possibly, or is it everyone's just in your face the whole time, talking a load of rubbish? I mean, a bit like Uxbridge, I suppose. But is it in any way a kind of normal place? How do you feel there?
I feel a bit. There's an excitement to it. There's a certain excitement to it, though it's funny. I went again this year because if you win something, they ask you to come back the next year and give it away to someone else, and that seems kind of a nice tradition. So Claire and I went again, and it was amazing how quickly the romance of that ceremony had worn off, of the Academy Awards. The first time it was incredibly exciting. Just to meet all these people even like Sylvester Stallone, and to have Kate Blanchett sitting across the aisle. You're sitting there on the aisle, and there's Kate Blanchett. And at some point, I said, "Oh, very nice to meet you," and she said, "Oh yes, this is very intimate," and it was very okay. Keep stum.
Yeah.
But what struck me particularly was seeing Kate Blanchett or Kate Winslet or particularly the actresses who are being looked at all the time, to just watch with what grace, and they would rise from their seats, and move towards the exit. That they was just so professional. That you could see they weren't particularly enjoying it, but that it was part of their job. It was their job to sell the film with their clothes, with their makeup, with their character, that was just part of the necessary job. And so, and meeting these, this takes hours and hours. There are as many press almost as there are of you here today. Yeah, as many as that, and you have to stand in front of this group of press, and all of you have bright cameras going bang, 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 bang. Your eyes are really blinded by it in the end. And then here, and everyone's shouting at you. It's very, very, it takes hours. And by the time it's done, when you get to what I thought was there'd be parties and you'd meet other actors. It'd be a kind of wild one. Jack Nicholson would be there, and you'd end up going to some bar, and Harry Dean Stanton would sing Mexican songs for you, and none of that happened. None of it.
What a surprise!
Yeah. It just you met a lot of no offense, because they're very important to the making of films, but a lot of executives, film executives and producers, and the conversation is pretty repetitive, and it wasn't all that. I mean, being innocent, I didn't know how to.
Yeah,
I
sure,
saw that all
sure.
the other actors probably went off to their private homes. I don't know if you know LA, but it's not really people tend to have parties. They have beautiful homes with pools, and so you have to be part of a social scene to meet people. There isn't a kind of open social scene.
Okay. Great. Okay. Let's open the floor. So we're going to have some questions now. Now we've got 2 roving mics. Okay. So if you want to ask a question, please put up a hand. I'll point you out. Please wait for the mic. Okay, because even if we can hear you, many of the audience won't be able to hear you unless you speak into a mic. The second request, please keep your questions short, sharp, to the point, because I'm sure there's lots of people who will want to ask questions. Okay, so a hand went up straight away there, this person there, and then we'll go to the end up there. Okay, so this one first.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you talk a little bit more about the womb approach that you just mentioned when you gave up your agent, please?
Yeah, thank you. One of the actresses working on the Shakespeare's weekend last weekend was from Holland, Anna May, and I didn't know about this group, but she said there's a particular group of women or people working with the energy of Mary Magdalene. So they're looking at her life, and they're looking at the teachings about Mary Magdalene and trying to see. They're doing that as a balance to what they perceive as a very masculine perception of how things should happen in the world, I guess. And she was talking a lot about the womb is a very important center for a woman, as important as the man's genitalia is to the man, and how it was very different. This is all very obvious stuff, but she said we need more leaders who work with this the idea that the womb is magnetic. It draws with equal force to the way that men penetrate and pierce and push. It pulls or draws. And this for some reason just made, I kind of knew that idea, but the way she expressed it was very clear for me that it's much easier to see the penetrating, pushing, piercing energy of the masculine in the world. And actually, but when I think about it, I've been drawn by the womb all my life. It's a very magnetic energy. It reminded me also, funnily enough, of what we had to learn at the Globe. Because when we first played at the Globe, we were also worried about not being heard. That we were all speaking like this, very loudly. Once more into the breach, dear friends, once more. And it gets into a panicky thing. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? And this is the kind of thing on the street, if you hear someone speaking like that, you're going, oh, that's trouble. I think I'm going to go over here. Someone's lost their mind. And so unconsciously, that kind of masculine, and we had a voice teacher who came and said, you're all electrifying the audience, but their ears are closing. As much as you're speaking loudly, their ears are closing because they can feel the panic of you. And we had to learn a magnetic voice that drew the audience towards us. And sometimes, in a Shakespeare play, say when Macduff's children are killed, and he says, all my chicks, all my chicks, all my little ones, all my little ones. He has to say that in such a way that all of you can hear it, but you mustn't for a moment think that he has any concern that he cares whether you're here. Because that would make it unbelievable that his kids had just been killed. So that kind of womb-like voice. Also, I think it just resonated in a lot of ways, too, for me, that some of the greatest acting I like is mysterious. But in our culture, which is so obsessed with information now and clarity, that it has to be the masculine clarity, that's the powerful thing, the clear message, get the message out there. And the womb's way of leading is mysterious. It's not visible. It's a totally different way of thinking about moving people towards something, to draw them towards it. Because this place that I want you to come to is a very, very fertile, creative place. It's a protective place. And so all those thoughts were just interesting to me as an artist.
Okay, so thanks
it's a little bit difficult to talk about because it's so on the edge of lust and sexuality, and I'm not talking about that aspect of it.
Did you talk about it with Sylvester Stallone at all?
Sylvester was very friendly. His brother was great, though. Did you see his brother's tweets afterwards? Who is this Mark Rylance? He can't even comb his hair. When I went this year, I almost took a comb, and
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Mark. You have a question up there,
Hello.
and then we'll go up there afterwards.
Hi, Mark. Nice to talk to you. I just wondered if you could talk to us about the importance of getting out your comfort zone. Maybe if it's like socially, intellectually, or creatively, like why it's so important to do that. Thank you.
That's a great question.
So
Great questions deserve. No, it's interesting. The comfort zone. I've always been someone who's. You put up a fence, and I'll always be interested in what's on the other side of that fence. And comfort is a certain fence, isn't it? The comfort zone, like the twilight zone. It's not the twilight zone. It's the comfort zone. I think it came from my mother. I just have always been suspicious of it. And so I've always been interested in not being comfortable, I guess. I know in a theatre production, things can get comfortable, and it's not so good. It's not so lively. It's not so spontaneous or fresh. Would you think? I think when things get a bit comfortable, it's funny. It's not a positive word for me. You know those tests when they say is yellow positive or negative for you? Community, social, comfortable isn't so positive for me. So I think I've always felt like there's some. It comes back curiously how a good question sets your mind rolling. It comes back to St. George the Dragon and the Maiden. He's on that horse because he has to ride out of town. He's done find the mate. The dragon's not in the town. It's out in the wilderness, and it's in a cave. Talk about not being comfortable. You have to go up to this dark cave, the St. George part of you, which is the only part of you that's going to find the soul, the maiden being the soul, in this way I'm thinking about it. Now, in most stories of St. George, he kills the dragon with a spear, doesn't he? He destroys this dragon creature. That's, I think, is not necessarily the oldest take on that story. There's another version, and by killing the dragon, he saves the maiden from this imprisonment by the dragony creature, and he takes the maiden back. He kind of wins her. But there's a lovely version where St. George, when he gets out there, he has a little like ukulele or a guitar, and he sings a song. And the vibrations of the song go into the cave and stir the dragon. And the dragon uncoils a bit and comes out of the cave, which when you think about it, you've got to get that escargot out of the shell, haven't you, if you're going to eat it. So the dragon comes out, and he keeps singing. And he lowers his spear, not to kill the dragon, but the dragon starts to come up the spear, which is now shaking, the shaking spear. And as the dragon comes up, it has 4 bodies. It can walk on the earth, it can swim in the water, it can fly in the air, and it breathes forth fire. And as it comes up the spear, it sheds each of those 4 bodies. Now, those 4 bodies in elemental thinking, Renaissance thinking, correspond to our physical nature, our psychological nature, our spiritual nature, our divine nature, 4-fold. It sheds each one of those as it comes up, as he sings his song. And lo and behold, when it gets to the top, the dragon itself is the maiden. The dragon is the maiden. The maiden then sits with him on his horse, and then he turns and goes back to society as a man now, as a spirit now connected to the soul. This is a very interesting myth about where we find our soul, our real soul's love in life. And it is outside the comfort zone in the wilderness. And The spear and the dragon then become about the two forms of energy. The energy that moves as fast as possible, which is light in a straight line, and is as fast as possible, and the opposite, which is the densest energy, which moves in a spiral, denser and denser and denser into a black hole. So there you have the first kind of polar opposites. How do you make a marriage or relationship between those two things in yourself and in nature? That's what the maiden is about. The maiden is the relationship between those two things. But I guess in my rationalization about my distrust of comfort, that mythology is interesting to me, that I will find the soul in the thing I think is a dragon in my life. That's where the soul will be. And it won't be by killing that dragon thing. So that dragon thing is, in a most obvious way, the kundalini, natural energy of the senses, which too many religions have told us to distrust and repress and kill in order to get this pure virgin maiden. But this old version of that story says, no, it's through your senses. It's through your senses, in a careful, interesting way, with a song or a harmony, calming the senses like Orpheus, that you will reveal the maiden in yourself. There's a very unusual answer to your question.
Yeah,
but
it was,
I hope it makes some sense.
Yeah, so I guess you weren't expecting that answer, but never mind. There was a question here, young lady there.
Hi.
Returning to the question of Shakespeare and the authorship, what initially, because you said obviously you did believe for a while that it was the Stratford man, but then your mind kind of changed. What was did someone come up to you and say, oh, is it here, read this thing saying it was Francis Bacon? What made you suddenly go, what if it wasn't this? Good
question, yeah. And I don't mean to speak disrespectfully. I suddenly was aware that many of you, a majority of you, love the man from Stratford very much, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to that man. I think that it's a very, very beautiful biography, tale and story and history, and possibly it's true. My mind changed partly because I went along to a group called the Francis Bacon Research Trust, and they never tried to convince me it was Francis Bacon. They just talked about the plays in such a wonderful way because they talked about the Renaissance, they talked about Hermetic learning, Kabbalah, alchemy, elemental stuff like I've just been talking about, all this Renaissance learning that was from Plato and from the ancients that was flooding in at that time. And it helped me so much in playing Romeo and playing Hamlet at that time. I was playing Romeo, for example. This was why I went along to the meeting. I met two fellas in the dark car park out in the wilderness again after a performance of Romeo and Juliet. And they said, oh, we're going along to this. I said, did you like it? Oh, yeah, they liked it. The alchemy is so wonderful in it, they said. And I thought alchemy was just a kind of trick way to pretend that you could make gold. I knew nothing about Jung and about alchemy being a way of describing the processes of change in the psyche and the soul. And they said, oh yeah, it's wonderful because he talks, first of all, Romeo, about having a soul of lead. And then when he's in the orchard, the trees are silver-topped. And that makes us aware that alchemically the poet is thinking this is a mercurial moment. This is a moment of massive change, silver. And then at the end, the parents make gold statues out of the two. And that's because their love has been an act of pure service, has been golden. In alchemy, it's the idea of service or wholeness. And I thought, oh, I didn't realize that. That confirms feelings I had about Romeo being very depressed at the beginning. That's not just me playing Hamlet in the evening and then coming playing Romeo and Hamlet beating Romeo up. There is something about that in the play. And I saw that the balcony scene could be very mercurial and silver and quick, and that this golden thing was not necessarily cynical at the end of the play. So I said, where'd you learn this? And they said, the Francis Bacon Research Trust. Come tomorrow if you want. So I just went along and learned a lot of stuff. One of the difficulties with the Stratford biography is because there is so little, if any, evidence of education or book learning or foreign travel or foreign languages. to say that there's alchemical or Kabbalistic knowledge in the plays causes a problem for the biography, because it's another thing you think, well, how did he get that knowledge? But if you're looking at the plays from the eyes of Francis Bacon, you've got no problem with that, because Francis Bacon was this genius of the time. Hilliard at age 17 paints a picture of him and says, and writes around in Latin, if only I could paint the mind of this person. So suddenly foreign travel and all this infinite knowledge is available in that biography. So do you see how a biography forms a kind of window or a door into the plays? Each of us will have a biographical story for the author. One isn't better than the other, but each one makes a particular shape and confines the possible meanings of the plays to one thing, do you see? So I just got interested in this stuff, was helpful to me, and after a while I remember waking up one morning near Stratford and thinking, oh, I'm not sure I see Shakespeare's face anymore. I'm not sure who I see writing these plays. I think I'm starting to see Francis Bacon as involved. I really don't know who did it still to this day, but it certainly seems very, very unlikely that people like Francis Bacon and the Earl of Oxford weren't involved in some way or other. The man from Stratford was obviously involved.
Okay, now I think we've got time only for one more question, I'm afraid.
Oh,
There
I'm
was
sorry,
someone
I give
right
such
next to
long
you there. No,
answers.
the questions were very short, the answers were very long.
You mentioned the director-driven mafia, the Royal Shakespeare Company in the 80s, I believe you said. At this stage in your career, what do you think of director-driven theatre, of a highly interventionistic and visionary kind?
I like lots of different forms of theatre now, and I've come to a feeling, partly the authorship question has helped me with this, of enjoying. I'm not really a monotheist. I like the old ways that there were lots of gods and lots of different ways of doing theatre, and it seems it would be a horrible thing if every production was how I like it. It would get very tedious and be horrible. So I've seen I've had marvelous experiences in the theatre that have been very director-led. Robert Lepage, I don't think is much of a collaborator. I think he's probably very decisive about what he wants, and there are many different forms. I suppose for my money, I enjoy acting and the play between actors. And if I go to something that is being presented rather than played, it's a bit like going to, I don't know, the football match that's being played tonight between, isn't Man United and Man City playing tonight or something? Or a tennis match. And rather than an actual match, they've rehearsed for 6 weeks, Serena and Conte. Let's practice for 6 weeks a really great tennis match. I'll hit it there. I was going the wrong way. Oh, and I missed it. I missed the tennis ball. 1.2, 15 love. And it's all acted out very well, but it's presented. I don't want to present it. I want to actually have it played like a sports match. I know that's kind of ridiculous because it is rehearsed, but I want it to be played with us in the same room. I want to be in the same room. And so sometimes very director-led theatre, that stuff is all controlled by the lights and the microphones, and there isn't so much chance for the actors to evolve in the moment and have spontaneous thoughts in the moment, you know. I think that's one of the things about the authorship question. I don't feel the author was forced to be anonymous. I feel the author chose to be anonymous, because I think at that time there wasn't just science as a way of learning things. There was divine inspiration as well. They understood that our minds are feminine as well as masculine, that our minds are receptive, and that you can get inspired. You then have to maybe check it with science, the science of the senses, check and see, is this right, is this true? But there's a balance of the two things. And really the greater of the two, in a way, is the inspired moment. When Federer, now at what age is he, 37, 38, gets a tennis shot back, you think, well, that's humanly impossible. When someone sings a great song that's really beyond, something was coming through that person. They were inspired. or a great bit of cooking, or you know, we've all done things ourselves where you've done something. How did that happen? That was amazing. I remember coming out in Wolf Hall where we were shooting arrows at a target. You remember Henry V and a few of us, and I came out after a lunch break and took an arrow and hit it right in the bullseye, and looked around at Henry VIII and the others. You know, they were all. But you get touched with grace, and I think that's what the author was saying. I'm not just a journeyman writer. This was Shakespeare, the goddess Athena, coming through me, and I was able to write it down and know things. But this was an inspired thing. Curiousness. I'm sounding like a Stratfordian now, because that's something they often talk about, don't they? That it was all done by the imagination. Sorry,
Great.
another long answer.
Okay, sit down, please. Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much for that, Mark. Thank you for giving. No, I mean this earnestly. Giving so much of yourself that you took so long over those really great answers. I can't say it without it sounding like I'm insulting you. So we'll move on. Thank you so much. Now, before we end, can I just bring your attention to something else that's happening next week. Is a talk by our own Professor Akram Khan, who's up there. Hi, Akram. And he's also up here. So that's a journey through mass, matter, and metaphysics, which should be very interesting. And you will see that's happening on the 11th of May. Secondly, please join us outside. We have some drinks and some canapes and so on and so forth. So you're welcome to stay there and
do ask me, if you have questions I haven't answered, do ask me questions out there too.
Okay, but yeah, get a drink and something to eat.
What? Get a drink first, this will be a long answer.
Yeah. You need to do that.
A tall drink.
But to end, it would be nice, Mark, if you would see us out with perhaps a little bit of Shakespeare, if you would.
Sure.
Stand up there and...
So this is a speech from Richard II, and he is so as you will remember, he has been deposed by Bolingbroke, and he has been put in prison, and the author has him on his own in prison with you, the audience. And shortly after this speech, which I'm going to speak with you, the guards come in, he hears music, and guards come in and kill him. So this was a speech I was doing last weekend by his tomb. I have been studying how I may compare this prison where I live unto the world. And because the world is populous, and here is not a creature but myself, I cannot do it, yet I'll hammer it out. My brain, I'll prove the female to my soul the father. And these two beget a generation of still breeding thoughts. And these same thoughts people this little world. In humors like the people of this world, for no thought is contented. The better sort, as thoughts of things divine, are intermixed with scruples, and to set the word itself against the word, as thus, come, little ones, and then again, it is as hard to come as for a camel to thread the postern of a needle's eye. Thoughts tending to ambition, they do plot unlikely wonders, how these vain, weak nails of mine may tear a passage through this hard world, my ragged prison walls, and for they cannot die in their own pride. Thoughts tending to content, flatter themselves, that they are not the first of fortune's slaves, nor shall not be the last, like silly beggars who sitting in the stocks refuge their shame that many have, and others must sit there. And in this thought they find a kind of ease, bearing their own misfortunes on the backs of such as have before endured the like. Thus play I in one person many people, and none contented. Sometimes am I king, then treason makes me wish myself a beggar, and so I am. Then crushing penury persuades me, I was better when a king. Then am I kinged again, and by think I'm unkinged by Bolingbroke. And straight am nothing, but whate'er I be, nor I, nor any man that but man is, with nothing shall be pleased till he be eased. With being nothing. Good way to end.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen.
Can't you? Can't you feel? I can feel it because how scattered my mind is, how mercurial and it's all over the place, isn't it? When I answer questions, how necessary, and thank God there is such a profession as acting for someone like me. That when I'm given lines like that, suddenly I move into a different place. Then you can really see what it means to me and how much I just feel more alive when I'm given the confines of a play and a character in a situation like that. But otherwise, I don't have the normal kind of boundaries of imagination. So it's very, very interesting tonight, this thing of talking a lot about myself and then stepping into a character and suddenly feeling almost more here than when I was actually just here, in an odd way, isn't it? I go to plays and I can't believe people are doing it.
Well, that's why I did it in that way. It's all about your career development.
It was brilliant. It was brilliant.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, could you
get out?
I'm trying to find the right way of saying this. If you have questions for Mark and you want to hang about, please do so outside while you're having a drink. Here. Mark, I'm a bit uncertain where I've got my own hands. Right. So we have to take a few photographs out here. So if you take yourselves outside, get a drink and so on and so on. Before you go, one last Brunel, welcome to Sir Mark Rylance.